Need some new Commander cards? Well, you can pre-order Commander Legends now from our amazing sponsor, Card Kingdom. Just head on over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Commander Legends spoilers, and good lord, do we have a ton of cards to talk about today. Some really sweet, cool new stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Magic cards. First up today, we have a new Mythic Legend, a new Mythic Partner Legend, and the return of a classic Magic character, that is Kamal, Heart of Krosa. So Kamal, 8 mana, green, you get a 5/5 legendary human druid. At the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3, gain trample until end of turn. Then for 2 mana, 1 and a green, you can turn a land you control into a 1/1 elemental creature token with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. And it's still a land. Also, for 2 mana, 1 and a green, until end of turn you can turn a land you control into a 1/1 elemental with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. It's a land, of course, and it's a partner. So Kamal, Heart of Krosa, obviously really expensive. 8 mana is a lot. The partner thing is a nice little upside, but this certainly feels like a commander or a card for go wide green decks. It calls back to the original Kamal, which is a lot cheaper on the front half, only 6 mana. It still turns lands into creatures, of course not indestructible with all those upsides, and then you gotta pay mana to overrun with it. I think the biggest upside of Kamal is the overrun ability, and I think that's kind of why I'm okay with paying 8 mana for Kamal. I don't know if I'd play as my commander necessarily, but the overrun ability is really good in the fact that you can play Kamal in your pre-combat main phase, go to combat, and immediately get an overrun. You're essentially almost getting a 5 mana spell as an ETB trigger. It's not technically an ETB trigger. It could die at instant speed before you go to combat, but most of the time you play Kamal, immediately get that overrun effect. If you got even more mana, you can turn your lands into creatures, beat down with those as well. If you untap with it, you're going to get an overrun again the next turn. So it's going to close out the game, assuming you have a big board really quickly once it gets going. Because of that, I think what I like about this card is maybe, depending on, we'll see what prices look like, but maybe this can be kind of a budget Craterhoof Behemoth. Craterhoof Behemoth is just the best game ender for a go-wide green deck. You make a bunch of elves, make a bunch of dorks, get your Craterhoof with the Green Sun Zenith, the Magus of the Order, get your Craterhoof and just kill your opponent in one big attack. Kamal, while not quite as scary as Craterhoof Behemoth, not immediately game over, it is, I think, better than the other similar options that we've seen as far as a creature-based overrun effect that you can tutor out with all your green creature-y stuff. So maybe this could be like a budget Craterhoof that you can snag, and you do get the upside of turning your lands into creatures. So that's kind of where I think this card lands. I'm not super stoked to play it as a commander, although that's partly because I'm not really a green beatdown commander player. If green beatdown commander is your thing, this is a pretty good option. The overrun ability is really powerful, but I'm excited to play this card in the 99, tutor it up after I build a big board, and hopefully just one-shot someone with that overrun ability. And if you can't kill the entire table, you get to do it again in the next turn because that ability is going to keep triggering. So as far as partners, kind of hard to figure this out. Tana is an obvious choice because Tana makes Saprolings, and then Kamal can pump the Saprolings. I kind of like Tevishchat here is another possible partner. Tevishchat making Thralls, which don't have Defender, even though they don't have any power, and then you can overrun them with Kamal. You can also do some shenanigans if you have too many lands. You can like turn a land into a creature and then sacrifice it to Tevishchat to draw cards. So there's some kind of sweet synergies there. Alana is also sort of interesting just because Kamal's going to be really big. Like, you play your Kamal, it's going to be an 8/8, and then Alana in your post-combat main phase can turn that into a bunch of mana that you can use to cast more spells. So there are some sweet partner options if you do want to go that direction. So I think Kamal, mostly hyped to play in the 99 and go wide green decks, like elf-style green decks, where I think this can either be an additional, but obviously worse Craterhoof Behemoth, or maybe a budget Craterhoof Behemoth. But either way, it's cool to see Kamal, a classic Magic character, making its return in Commander Legends. We also got Kamal's signature spell, Kamal's Will. So this one's kind of interesting. We saw another one of these. I think it was like the black one. So essentially, you got two modes. It's an instant. It's 4 mana in green. If you don't have your commander, or a commander, you only get one mode. If you have a commander, you can choose both modes. The modes are, until end of turn, any number of target lands you control become 1/1 elemental creatures with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. So essentially, mass Kamal. Kamal does that to 1 land for 2 mana. Kamal's Will does it to any number of lands that you want for 4 mana. Also, you can choose a creature you don't control and have all your creatures deal damage equal to its power to it. So this is essentially, I would say, kind of a fog mixed with a murder. And this might be selling it short, because you can turn on your lands. You're going to be -4 because you need the mana to cast Kamal's Will. It doesn't untap your lands. That is important to point out. You can use it aggressively, but since it's an instant, what I imagine is your opponent's going to attack you, and you're like, all right, Kamal's Will, turn all my lands into indestructible creatures. Maybe you could kill something in combat. Worst case, you got a bunch of blockers, so you fizzle your opponent's combat step, basically like a fog. It's also very close to a murder in green. Green decks tend to have a lot of creatures, so as long as you have some amount of creatures going on, you should be able to, at instant speed, kill any one creature of your choice that your opponents control, which is actually pretty powerful for a green card. Like, that's a decent green removal spell. So while I don't think this card is especially efficient in either mode, the flexibility is nice. Like, 4 mana hard removal in green, of course needing to have creatures, but still should kill pretty much anything. Combined with a fog, combined with maybe in the late game with Kamal itself, you like turn all your lands into creatures, overrun, kill your opponent that way. It does offer some upside there. The thing about this card is we've seen a lot of similar cards in the past. Like, there's a bunch of green cards that can turn your lands into creatures. A Sylvan Awakening, Natural Affinity, Root Awakening. The biggest thing that sets Kamal's Will apart, in my opinion, is the fact that you can do it at instant speed, which is why we're kind of talking about the fog aspect of it, because there are a bunch of different things that essentially do the same thing if you just want to untap your lands and go beat down. It also is worth mentioning that turning your lands into creatures can open up some combo potential. We haven't really seen this breaking the format. We just talked about there's a bunch of cards that can turn your lands into creatures, but in theory, turning your lands into creatures means like Intruder Alarm can untap them, so maybe you have some infinite mana shenanigans that you can pull off with Intruder Alarm, Kamal's Will, and like a creature that repeatedly bounces itself with its Enter the Battlefield trigger. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. So Kamal's Will, it seems like a fine utility spell. I like the fog aspect. I like the removal aspect of it. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. I look at this as a very defensive card. Maybe it has more offensive potential than I give it credit for, but I basically see this as a really good defensive card, giving you that fog plus removal in your green deck, which is something that is at least worth considering. Is it going to be a new staple? Ugh, I don't know. Green has gotten so many good cards in recent years. There's not a lot of room. Like, even the removal of green has been improving, but I think it's still in the conversation as a sweet removal spell combined with a fog, and who knows, maybe you go beat down with your lads every once in a while too. Next on our list, we have a pretty spicy mythic pirate, Port Razor. So Port Razor, 5 mana red card. You get a 4/4 orc pirate. When it deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control, and you get an extra combat phase after the combat phase you were in. Downside is, Port Razor can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. So this means, in a 4-player game, if you can actually deal combat damage with Port Razor to each opponent, like make it unblockable or something, you can get 4 combat steps every turn cycle, which is actually super impressive. Also worth mentioning, only Port Razor can't attack someone that's already attacked. So if you want to, you can like send all your creatures at Tomer, and then get an extra combat step when you hit with Port Razor. Then the next turn, you can't send Port Razor at Tomer, but you can send that at Crim, let's say, and all the rest of your creatures at Tomer to try to kill Tomer and still get that extra combat step. So I actually think this is a really powerful card. We have a bunch of creatures that can give you extra combat steps. We have like Combat Celebrant, limited essentially to 1 each turn for the most part. Morag can make a whole bunch, a little bit expensive, does require land drops. Scourge of Thrones can do it, but it does require you to attack the person with the highest life total. So there are some drawbacks to all of these. Port Razor, I think, is arguably close to Morag in power level. You can't go infinite combat like you can with Morag if you put some work into it, but getting potentially 3 combat steps a turn is very, very scary and probably allows you to kill someone if you have a big board. I think the key to making Port Razor work is you got to make it unblockable. Like, that's the biggest thing about this card, because it does have to deal combat damage, and because of how it's worded, where you have to attack a different person each combat combat step, you can't just go after the person who has no blockers. You really need to be able to attack everyone in your turn cycle. So if you're playing Port Razor, stuff like Whisper Silk Cloak, Key to the City, Rogue's Passage, anything to give you evasion with your Port Razor is going to go way, way up in value, because really, if you could get down a Port Razor and like Whisper Silk Cloak it or something, there's a good chance you're just going to win the game really, really quickly with all those combat steps. I do like how Port Razor interacts with pirates. We've seen, especially with our new Commander Legends cards, some of them that we haven't even talked about yet, but we'll get to, we've seen that pirates focus on dealing combat damage. Like, if you look at Admiral Wreck-It Brass, the original pirate legend, it wants you to deal combat damage to an opponent with a bunch of pirates, because then you get to steal their stuff. Or Zara wants you to attack your opponents because then you get to put their creatures into play. Or Malcolm gets you a bunch of treasure tokens. So pirates are about attacking, and even about attacking different players. Port Razor fits perfectly into that theme. So I really like how Port Razor fits with a pirate deck. On the other end, you can just be in a attack step deck. Like, you don't really have to be pirates. There's no reason. Like, I think you'll play Port Razor in almost every pirate deck, but you can also play Port Razor in just decks that care about attacking. Like, maybe you are Sword of Fire and Icing. Maybe you are Balefire Dragon. Maybe you are Cunning. Anything that has an attack step trigger, like a deals combat damage trigger, is going to be sweet. Like, imagine your Port Razor, not just with the Whisper Silk Cloak, but with a Sword of Fire and Ice on it. So you're attacking someone, you're drawing cards, you're dealing damage, then you get to attack someone else, do it again. Maybe you got Balefire Dragon going, so you're wrathing the board or making tons of tokens with Tana. So I actually think it's maybe even more fun to just use Port Razor in a deck that's built around attacking and dealing combat damage rather than pirates in specific. So I really like this card. I think it's super powerful. Of course, it does need that evasion. That's the biggest thing I want to just keep pointing out about this card. Without evasion, I think Port Razor is pretty bad. But if you can build around it a little bit, make sure to give it evasion, maybe throw haste into the mix as well, then Port Razor is pretty insane and can pour on a really ridiculous amount of damage really quickly. Speaking of pirates, we mentioned Zara a minute ago, and Zara is a super sweet legendary pirate. Zara Renegade Recruiter, so 5-mana 4/3 flying human pirate. When it attacks, you get to look at defending player's hand and put a creature from it onto the battlefield under your control, attacking that player or planeswalker they control. It goes back to their owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So Zara is essentially like a reverse sneak attack or a reverse Perforos. It seems super fun to build around. You're able to just take your opponent's best creature. Maybe you get a Muldrifter, get the enter the battlefield trigger out of it. Worst case, you just steal their biggest thing and smash your opponent with their own creature. What a hilariously sweet way to build a deck. So I actually think Zara is a really cool build around. I think probably the easiest way to build around it is to know what's in your opponent's hand. Like, I think that's the trick here. Attacking someone in the blind and just crossing your fingers they have something good, that's fine, but maybe you stick a telepathy so you know what's in your opponent's hands, or Azur's weirding so you know what's in everyone's hands. Then you can make really good attacks with Zara. And remember, Zara, it triggers when it attacks, not when it deals combat damage. So even if your opponent has a blocker, you're still able to steal that creature, which is very, very powerful. The only downside to Zara, as far as pirates in specific, is pirates are actually a Grixis tribe, so if you play Zara as Pirate Tribal, you're going to miss out on some pretty good ones. Hostage Taker, Deadeye Plunderers, Ruin Raiders, there's some other ones as well. So as a Pirate Tribal commander, I'm actually kind of meh on Zara. I think you probably stick with Admiral Beckett Brass, just because you get all the pirates. And pirates, even though they're getting more and more support, they got support in Jumpstart, they're getting more support in Commander Legends, they still do just need more good tribe members. So it's really hard with a tribe that is relatively new like pirates to just cut out entire colors. So I think the Zara is probably best built around in some sort of attack step style deck. I think that's the sweetest thing to do with Zara. We were just talking about Port Razor. They work really well together because remember, whenever it attacks, you get to steal that creature. Well, if you're taking extra combat steps, you're getting to attack with all the creatures you steal. So you attack with Zara in Port Razor, you steal a creature with Zara, you smash someone, Port Razor is going to untap all your stuff, give you an extra combat step, including the creature that you stole from someone's hand, then you attack someone else, steal another creature, get a even bigger board, get another combat step. Eventually you're attacking with like a ridiculous number of your opponent's creatures, just bashing people to death with their own things. You can do the same things with like Aggravated Assault, Morag. So I think that's the sweetest way to build Zara, is like, is it extra combat steps and just try to trust that your opponent has good things and build them down, throw in the telepathies for value. So even though I don't think Zara is a great pirate commander, Although it's a fine pirate commander. If you want to build Zara pirates, not going to discourage that. I just think Admiral Brass offers more for pirates. I'd rather have Admiral Brass as my commander so I can have the black pirates and Zara in my 99. But Zara is an extra combat step commander. Really, really fun. Really, really spicy. Super sweet to build around. I really like this card. We also got Gore Murdoch. And oh my god, Amphibiologist. I think I nailed that pronunciation. Can we just go with Gore? Let's just call it Gore. So Gore, very weird commander. 3 mana, legendary creature in the Simic colors. It's a human scout. You get a 3/2. You and permanents you control have protection from salamanders. Of all things, protection from salamanders. One of the weirdest lines of text we've seen on a Magic card since Cowards Can't Block Warriors, in all honesty. Like, it is a weird ability. And then at the beginning of your end step, each player who controls the fewest creatures gets a 4/3 blue salamander warrior creature token. So this is kind of like a Grismoldian commander where you can give your opponents creatures, maybe turn it to your benefit, a little bit like Hungry Lakes, and a little bit like a Fiddlemancer as well, because if you're the player with the least amount of creatures, you're going to get the salamander token, and a 3/4 is actually like a pretty reasonable body. Like, let's say you can get that in your first end step, you're getting for 3 mana, a 3/2 and a 4/3. That's just a lot of bodies on the battlefield. As far as what to actually do with Gore, I don't know. I honestly have no idea. Like, this is a card that really has me befuddled as to how to build around it. I guess you go Salamander Tribal. That's the first thing that came to mind. If you want to play your good little lurkers and Wormfang Newts and so forth, Gore is, I mean, perfect for that. We do have some Salamanders in Magic, including a new one, which is actually pretty exciting. Amphin Mutineer. And Amphin Mutineer, this might be the most exciting Salamander we've ever seen. I think it is clearly the #1 Salamander in all of Magic. 4 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 non-salamander creature. Of course, you couldn't exile a salamander. That would be too busted. And that creature's controller gets a 4/3 salamander warrior creature token. Then you could oddcore it for 6. You're going to get all those copies of it and exile something from each opponent, theoretically. So this is kind of like a creature that is also a Pongify or a Beast Within, or maybe even a better comparison, a Reality Shift, because it actually exiles, which is an upside. It works with Panharmonicon because it adds sort of the battlefield trigger. So I think this is just a new blue staple. Like, I think this is sneakily one of the best cards in the entire set for, like, mono blue decks in specific that struggle with removal. Blue decks tend to have a hard time just straight up killing things. This doesn't just kill it, exiles. Yes, your opponent gets a 4/3, but if your opponent has some massive indestructible set, a Blightsteel, a Ulamog, a Clothis, whatever, Amphin Mutineer takes care of that. Leaving behind a 4/3 isn't really a big deal. I mean, people play Pongify all the time, and it's essentially the same token. It's getting 1 more power, but really, it's very close to the same token you're getting from Pongify. So I think Amphin Mutineer is just a card you play in like every mono blue deck. Probably some other decks as well. It is a pirate. It is a salamander for the notorious salamander tribal deck we've been brewing. But I think just any blue deck wants it because it's a really strong removal spell with additional synergy and the encore ability. This is something that it just goes beyond archetypes. You don't have to play this in any specific archetype. It's just like the blue Beast Within, where I think you just want this in every mono blue deck because it's good removal and blue decks need good removal. Next on our list, we have Horizon Stone, a 5 mana artifact that just says if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. So this is almost exactly Crewfix, except in colorless form. Like, Crewfix has the same exact ability where your unused mana turns into colorless mana, so you can tap all your land, save it up through phases and steps and even turns. Also reminiscent of like Omnath in Leyline Tyrant, obviously with a twist because your mana becomes colorless. So Horizon Stone, what do you do with this card? And I think the answer is you try to make a lot of mana and then cast big things. If you look at how people play Crewfix in specific, the main idea is to have Nyxbloom Ancients or Seedborn Muse to untap all your lands each turn. You could throw in Forsaken Monomute to double up your colorless mana, because since Horizon Stone is colorless, anything to make lots of mana. Then you just try to like float all your mana, maybe you save up 100 mana, and you win with, I don't know, a big Genesis Wave for your entire deck, whatever big payoff you have. So I think that's one way to play it, although Horizon Stone, to me, it feels mostly designed to be a colorless card. I think that's the biggest upside of this card, is if you go back to the Krufix example, one of the main things that Krufix casts with all the mana that it stores up in turns colorless is Big Eldrazi. And Horizon Stone seems kind of ideal for any colorless commander, where you can now play Forsaken Waste as well. You got your Kozilek, you got your Ulamox, you got your Artisan of Kozileks. Horizon Stone allows you to cast it, float all your mana, untap the next turn, start casting your massive Eldrazi to generate additional value, draw extra cards, exile things, all that good stuff that Eldrazi does. So I think that Horizon Stone, it is a really powerful card. Just be warned, it is a very removable card. Like, most well-built commander decks are going to have answers to artifacts, and that is the risk with the, okay, I'm going to play this, I'm going to float tons of mana, I'm going to store up 100 mana, do something crazy, cast Big Eldrazi. If you go on that plan and your opponent's like, all right, well, Return to Dust, or Anguish Unmaking, or Naturalize, suddenly you start losing your mana that you saved up again. It's all going to go away at the end of the next phase, so there is risk here that you go on this store-up mana plan, only to have it answered, and then you get nothing for it, and you kind of skipped a few of your turns along the way. Krufix at least is indestructible, which helps get around some of those issues. Horizon Stone, it dies to a lot since it's an artifact, and most decks are prepared to answer artifacts. So I think Horizon Stone has potential to be really powerful. If you're in blue and green, Krufix is just a better version of Horizon Stone, but in a colorless deck, I could see the possibilities of this in conjunction with Forsaken Sanctuary or something, and I don't know, maybe other color combinations can take advantage of it as well. The question is, what are you going to cast with all the colorless mana? Eldrazi seem like the go-to, but maybe there's some other possibilities as well. So powerful, but definitely a high-risk card, which might keep it from seeing play in most decks, just because the blowout potential is really high. And unlike creatures like Omnath or Leyline Tyrant, it's not like you could really stick a Swiftfoot Boots or a Lightning Greaves or something on your Horizon Stone. A little bit harder to protect, so likely to die and get blown out. But if it sticks around, you can make a lot of mana, save up a lot of mana, and do really crazy things. We also got Yarlock of the Burn Thrash. So Yarlock is, oh man, this is a spicy one. So a 4-mana Jund Legend, a Vashino Shaman. You get a 4/4 with Vigilance. The big deal is players lose life equal to unspent mana they lose. Essentially, it brings back Mana Burn. Mana Burn is back in Magic, and you can pay 1 to make each player add 3 mana, which then will burn your opponents if you do it on like their end step and they can't cast an instant to spend it. So essentially, the idea of Yarlock is Mana Burn is back. You're able to drain your opponents by giving them extra mana. So how do you actually build around this? And I think a lot of the ideas I've seen are a little bit sketchy, because remember, you can play like a Blink Mothern, or you can play a Suzuko, any of these cards that like give each player mana. The problem is, if you're giving your opponent mana during their main phase, chances are your opponent can spend it. Like maybe they have no cards in hand and it does burn them to some extent, but in reality, there's a good chance you're just helping your opponent if you play cards like this. Same as like kind of true of Victory Chime, Spectral Searchlight, Valley Maker, although these cards have the upside that you can give your opponent mana at an inopportune time. You can wait until, I don't know, your turn, let's say, when your opponent would have to be able to cast an instant, reducing their odds of being able to use the mana and burn them with it. So all of these cards I think you will see play in a Yarlock deck, but the big ones are cards that punish your opponent in some way or another for tapping their lands. You have cards like Citadel of Pain. At the end of each player's turn, it deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of untapped lands they control. This forces your opponent essentially to either tap all their lands and then potentially take damage with Yarlock, or leave their lands untapped and then they take the damage from Citadel of Pain. Same thing with like Power Surge. War Toll's another one that forces your opponents to tap all their lands. And if you're forcing your opponents to tap lands, you can also double up their mana, as weird as it sounds. Like, this is a weird high-risk plan, undoubtedly, but Yarlock is a weird high-risk commander, so you're forcing your opponent to tap all their lands to try to burn them with Yarlock, then you throw in Mana Flares and Heartbeats of Spring and Dictate of Karametra, so when your opponent's tapping their lands, they're getting double, triple the mana or whatever, and then your opponent's going to die really quickly. Like, if your opponent can't spend all that mana, they're going to die. Of course, you are helping your opponent dump their hand. You're giving them the mana to kill your Yarlock or your enchantment, so there is a lot of risk here, but it sounds like a hilariously fun build around. So Yarlock, I don't think this is an especially good commander, but I do think this is definitely one of the most unique and interesting build around commanders. Like, I love commanders like this. I would rather see all commanders be like unique Yearlock commanders rather than just like overpowered busted commanders. This already has me thinking about all the possibilities, all the ways to build a deck around its super unique ability. Plus, it's a shout out to the old timers who always talk about the good old days of mana burn. Now you got the perfect legend to build your mana burn commander deck thanks to Commander Legends. Next on our list, we have a sweet Bant legendary dragon, Amarith the Lustrous. And Amarith, 6 mana 6/6, flying dragon. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it shares a card type with that permanent, you can reveal it and put it into your hand. So Amarith is sort of like Soul of the Harvest, a little bit like Great Hedge, a little bit like Tetyova. The upside of Amarith is it triggers on any permanent coming into play. So you play a land, you play an artifact, you play an enchantment, you play a creature, it doesn't matter. The downside is you don't necessarily know what's on top of your deck, so you're not always drawing a card. Like Tetyova, when you play a land, you always draw a card. Great Henge, when a creature comes into play, you always draw a card. Amarith, when a creature, land, or artifact or enchantment comes into play, you might be drawing a card. Is that good enough to just like spin the wheel randomly? The good news is you don't have to. I think if you're playing Amarith, what you want to be doing is like Sensei's Divining, topping, scroll racking, retreat to Coral Helming, anything that lets you know what's on the top of your deck or controls what's on the top of your deck. Because if you can set things up in a way where you know that whenever you're playing a land, you're drawing an extra card, or resolving a creature, you're drawing an extra card, or playing an artifact, you're drawing an extra card, that is a really powerful ability to have on your commander. So I think if you can manipulate the top of your deck, Amarith can actually be very powerful, more powerful than the other similar cards we were talking about. The downside of Amarith is it kind of feels like bad Tulane to me. Like, Tulane, yes, it only works with creatures, but it also ramps you, and it's a cast trigger, so you don't even get to resolve your spell, and it can bounce things. So Amarith, I don't know. Like, is it unique and interesting and powerful enough to actually build your deck around? I'm skeptical. I'd want this as my commander. On the other hand, if I'm playing a Bant deck and I have like Sensei's Divining Top, Scroll Rack, anything like that, then I am interested in Amarith in the 99 just as a way to churn through my deck and draw a bunch of cards. So as a commander, I'm sort of like medium on Amarith, but as a 99 card, I think it's pretty sweet. You never say no to drawing cards, and with the right setup, Amarith can draw a lot of them. We also got Court of Cunning, a pretty sweet Monarch enchantment. So Court of Cunning, 3 mana, blue enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, which that's already great. Like, becoming the Monarch is really, really good. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players mill 2 cards, except if you're the Monarch, each of those players mill 10 cards as well. Notice it does not say any opponent. You can mill yourself with this as well. So this is kind of like a Curse of the Bloody Tome for everyone that can also be a repeatable glimpse of the unthinkable. Like, milling everyone for 10 every turn is really, really bonkers if you're the Monarch, so that's going to mill people out very, very quickly. You could probably play this and then just try to take extra turn steps while you remain the Monarch to draw extra cards and mill everyone out of the table as you're taking extra turns. I mean, your opponents are not going to really enjoy that playstyle, but that is a thing you could do. So, Court of Cunning, the thing I like about it is I feel like it fits in 2 styles of decks. First, if you're trying to mill your opponent out of the game with Burvac or Phoenix or Anwan, Court of Cunning's great. Like, being the Monarch's good. It's a very powerful mill card. On the other hand, I'm kind of even more interested in this is a self-mill 10. Maybe you're playing Sidisi or Madrotha or Tassiger. These are decks that really want to be dumping cards into your own graveyard. Court of Cunning can just allow you to keep milling yourself every single turn, which is great with any graveyard synergies, animation synergies. So I feel like Court of Cunning actually going to see playing a lot of decks. I don't think you just play this in a generic deck to become the Monarch, but if you're trying to mill your opponent or you have your own graveyard synergies and you're trying to self-mill, Court of Cunning is not just going to be good in your deck, but going to be one of the best support pieces you can play in either of those style of decks, because Monarchy is great, and as a mill card, especially if you're a Monarch, it is very, very powerful enchantment. Finally today, in the world of lower rarity cards and reprints, we got some interesting pirates. Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. kind of an interesting partner commander. So 3 mana 2/2 flying Siren Pirate. Whenever one or more pirates you control deal damage to your opponents, you create a treasure token for each opponent dealt damage this way. So essentially, if you have Malcolm down and you can hit each of your opponents with a pirate, you're going to get 3 extra mana per turn. That's actually pretty impressive. That's a little bit like Smothering Tithe almost that you're getting in your pirate deck. Is that enough to make me play Malcolm as my commander? Maybe, especially if I can partner it with something. But I definitely think this is an easy inclusion in the 99 of any pirate deck as a surprisingly powerful blue ram spell. Merchant Raiders is actually a pretty decent removal spell. When it comes into play, you tap something down, or when another pirate comes into play, and that thing stays tapped down as long as you control Merchant Raiders. So if you can protect Merchant Raiders, you can theoretically just tap down all of your opponent's stuff as you're playing your pirates, allowing you to keep attacking, get treasures with your Malcolm, do all your other attacky pirate Admiral Breaker Brass synergies. So I think that's another easy auto include in pirates. Kaisiel Skirmisher, I don't really care about that one. That's limited only, father. But Malcolm and Merchant Raiders, really sweet pirate cards. We also got a bunch of elf stuff. So mostly a bunch of good elf reprints. 2 Lords, Imperious Perfect, Immaculate Magistrate, Findor Elves, hasn't been reprinted in a minute it feels like. Good to have that returning. Fairhaven Elf, another good ramp elf. The new card is Numa Draga Chieftain. So Numa, another partner commander, 3 mana 2/2 elf warrior. Beginning a combat on your turn, you can pay double X, and if you do distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target elves you control. I actually think this is a pretty powerful elf, because what do elves do really well? They make ridiculous amounts of mana. Numa is a way, if you have nothing better going on, you can spend those ridiculous amounts of mana rather inefficiently, but you can spend it to put a bunch of counters on your team. You can go all in on one creature, trying to make it into a one-shot threat. You can go wide and pump all your stuff to deal a bunch of combat damage to different opponents. So Numa, I think, I don't know if I play as a commander, but I would definitely play it in my 99. Also worth mentioning, obviously if you make infinite mana, you can distribute infinite counters and just kill the entire table, and it's not that hard to make infinite mana if you want to. So as an infinite mana payoff, I think that adds even more potential to Numa as a commander. But even if it's just a random elf card, I think this is a card I would slot into most of my elf decks as just a backup payoff for all the mana the elves can make. We also got some random stuff. Cordis Cinderclaw Familiar, kind of a cute little commander, makes it so whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals damage to each opponent. Interesting ability, although since it only impacts commanders, and Cordis itself is only a 1/1, it's not going to deal that much damage. But if you're playing some sort of Voltron-y commander deck, Cordis could actually be a good addition to a Voltron-style deck. So your one attack is actually killing the entire table. Natural Reclamation, apparently there's a Cascade cycle of utility spells. 5 mana blow up artifact or enchantment is a lot. Cascade is a night bonus. Meteoric Mace, kind of the same deal. A 6 mana 4 to equip equipment that gives a creature +4/+0 and trample. Again, not very efficient, but it does Cascade. Is that enough to make it playable? Leaning towards no, but I don't know. Maybe there's some more possibility there. With Meteoric Mace, at least, the nice thing is you can potentially bounce an artifact back to your hand with some synergies, so maybe there's a way you can use this to Cascade repeatedly. Although, again, as an actual card, it's very overcosted. Reprint-wise, Reliquary Tower coming back. Can always use more Reliquary Towers. No matter how many times it gets reprinted, it's still worth a few dollars because, like, every deck plays it. So getting more of them, including an extended border version, never a bad thing. Otherwise, some random common jank. Nothing really interesting for competitive play, but stuff to round out the limited format. And that, I believe, brings us to the end of our daily Commander Legends spoilers for today. Good lord, so many cards. So what do you think about all these new cards? How good is Kamal? Our new Kamal is the repeatable overrun. What about Amareth? Is the fact that you can potentially draw a card every single permanent you play worth it, or is it downside that you need to actually have the right permanent type on the top of your deck too much, making it a 99 card rather than a commander? What about Zara? What do you want to do with this new sweet reverse sneak attack creature, allowing you to steal creatures from your opponent's hands and put them right into play? Is it a pirate card or just an extra combat step card? Can Horizon Stone show up in decks, or is it too risky that it gets blown up? What about Yarlock? Is bringing Mana Bird back in Magic a good idea? How can we build around that, make that good? Or is it just going to be a trap where we give our opponent all this mana and then they kill us with it? Port Raiser, how many extra combat steps can you take? What about Gore? What do we want to do with Salamander Tribal? How can we take advantage of the Salamander legend? Amphin Mutineer, is that a new blue staple? Do you just play that in every deck? The Elf reprints, the Pirate reprints, everything else. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.